All right.
I have to
Amikwa.
apologize for the birds in the background. Hang on.
Oh, we don't even hear that little birdie singing. He hasn't landed on your shoulder yet, so that's a surprise. But Corey and Chief Stacy, Chief Amikwa, please carry on. And again, anyone who wants to ask questions, we'll be opening the floor for that.
Yeah, just a moment here. I'm just bringing up the Vermont there, Stacey. He'll be able to chat about that. It's a very interesting piece. Just one second here. But interestingly enough, before a single treaty was signed, before a single reserve was marked out, before even the words Canada echoed through the courtrooms and classrooms, there were names. Not our names, but names given to us. And through these names came assumptions, hierarchies, and control. And in 1758, and our good friend Grand Chief Wabasqua, he pointed me on to Carl Leonis. Uh, he published Systema Natura, and a text still celebrated as a foundation of Western science. It was called a revolution, but inside its pages was something far more insidious, and it was really the birth of scientific racism. Because Carl, he didn't just catalog plants and minerals; he fractured humanity itself, dividing people into types based on skin color, geography, and invented temperaments. Europeans, they were wise, inventive, law abiding. Africans were described as lazy, governed by impulse. Indigenous peoples were labeled the Americanus, reddish skinned, ruled by custom, cheerful but simple. Not idle descriptions, but he codified worldviews, masked as science and handed down as truth. So here's how his work describes our ancestors. He described the Americanus as reddish, choleric, upright, hair black, thick, straight, wide nostrils, freckled face, tenacious, cheerful, free, and then paints themselves with red lines, governed by custom. And I've also put his Wikipedia page, and you can access it through there, Systema Natura, and if you read up page 20 to 23. So, in a single stroke, indigenous people were categorized with plants and animals, not as sovereign and autonomous nations, not as living cultures, but as specimens. And, right on cue, these scientific classifications took hold. Indigenous nations began disappearing from the maps. And the language of biology became the logic of bureaucracy. The lands divided up like plant kingdoms, identities fragmented like species, laws and stories overwritten by taxonomies. We never consented to them. And he wrote, when the names of beings are it's all written in Latin, this is an English transcription. When the names of beings are confused, everything becomes confused. Therefore the assignment of names was the act of the first man in the golden age, and that's on page 8. So he didn't realize it, but he was describing colonialism itself. He who names it claims it. And to classify is to contain, to define is to dominate. And this wasn't just science. This was supremacy with a lab coat on. And it was the beginning of a system where objectivity was weaponized to justify oppression. So reason meant ranking, and humanity meant some humans more than others. And the final irony is that he called humans the most perfect of creation, seekers of wisdom, crowned with reason. Yet, while celebrating Homo sapiens, he made sure not all humans would be seen as fully human. And on page 3, he says, "Oh, how worthless man is unless he rises above the human condition. Truly wise is he who considers the end." So the Amikwa, they know this end too well. And the denial of nationhood, the erasure from the treaties, the labeling as half breeds, extinct, vanished, stragglers. But here's the part they didn't see coming, is that we're still here. And Chief Stacy, is still here. He's still able to tell his story, and that's why we're here. So, Stacy, I'm not sure if you'd like to chat. I can bring up these as well. I have the Vermont. I have the plate 35, the 1701, the Cornelli map, transcriptions from the 1701. If you want to chat with that, or if you have your own,
That's fine, Corey. It's visual reference for people watching and listening here to have something substantial to base this on. So it's fantastic.
okay. Well, I'll just
So
zoom in. It's easier for me to click on it and zoom in.
so what you're staring at here, Corey, is producing. This is the uh, Guillaume Delisle rendition of what was found by the recordings of Father Vimont of the Jesuit order. You know, the Jesuits were first on the scene here in this region. They came with robes and sandals into 6 foot snowdrifts to uh, reinforce salvation under the Christian ethic of the situation that I spoke of before, the language of savagery versus the language of others. So contained within the language of savagery, there's a long list of ordinance and legislative undertakings that I could demonstrate for you to encompass what it details. That's a long lecture, and so I'll give you the shorter version. So the first example we like to describe is in 1510, there was a legislative undertaking that was issued in relationship to the discovery of the New World. And so on that undertaking, it was described in the 1510 as a document called Requerimiento, and you can search this up and read it for yourself. The basic summarization of Requerimiento was the Pope is the master of the universe. The kings and queens own all the land. The savages, pagans, and infidels need to convert to Christianity and behave themselves. If you choose not to behave yourselves, we'll kill yous all, and it'll be your fault because we told you so. If you do behave yourselves, we'll offer you privileges and exemptions. And so this is describable today in the modern context of what you refer to as an Indian status card. And so in that Indian status card at the bottom, it says, is an Indian within the meaning of the word in the Indian Act. And it describes a surname attached to it and an identity that's been formed from it. So the situation in the modern context is very far displaced from what we're describing for you as the original titles that were encountered. So this map that Corey's placed up, it is significant of what was understood at the time of early contacts as what consisted of original title. So this is the region we've taken a concern with, is basically encompassed in this mapping. So it's basically from Lake Nipigon to Detroit over to Baie-Comeau. And it's all kind of signified in this mapping. What's intriguing and interesting about this mapping is what the original titles herein contained are describing and what they're uh, evidencing as knowledge. And so it takes a bit of serious study and research in order to fully appreciate what's engraved on this image. And so how it all fits in the backdrop of history. And to bring us into the modern reality of how that all uh, still has motion in the shaping of what we like to call reality culminating the future. And the future is speculative. Reality is history based. And so there's this long procession of action and the recordings of those actions and to inform us of what the past was like, to give us grounding in reality, to realize, uh, what still exists and still is available. So from that, we've come very grounded in reality that anybody that engages this subject matter, we you come away with a completely different outlook on the history of the world, on the condition of people, on the influences and the the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak, of what's uh, available to us as reality. So it can be a real shocker for some and a real relief for others when you start to intake what we're describing here as knowledge. So it becomes quite a journey for any individual that finds them on one side of it or the other. And so we refer to it sort of as a coin. And so the coin has one image on one side and the image on the other side, and two competing uh, views are meeting in the middle. And so we like to tread on the middle ground with this. So we're doing the best we can to form it as a unbiased piece of knowledge. And so, this plate is from the Atlas of Canada. And so it describes a situation that happened, and it's called the Great Dispersion. And so these groups were pushed, pulled, and dragged into different regions of territory in order to escape conflict. The map, the 1639, 1640 Vermont map is what you're looking at there is a posture of war. And so the conflict had developed so much so by 1639 and 1640 that you uh, start to see this posture forming. And so there was this aggravation between two language groups. You'll see the Haudenosaunee language group and the Anishinaabe language group were finding themselves in conflict in these early times. And I believe the conflicts were due to the unleashing of uh, unwanted disease in the Mississippi River system 100 years previous to this recording. And so in the Gulf of Mexico, under the Spanish lead, the atrocities that happened in the Gulf of Mexico, the disease, the warfare, the outright slaughter, the things that were going on there, the atrocities that happened, and those were dictated to by what we understand as the doctrines of discovery. Those diseases were given free roam into the river system, which made its way to the Great Lakes region 100 years before any recorded um, knowledge was made by any European. The Jesuit came onto the scene here in the 1600s, and in their early recordings, they describe disease and warfare rampaging. And, you know, between these groups of people searching for answers of how such a devastation could come to their people, it appears that they began to blame one another. And so conflict arose from misunderstanding these diseases. And so, we end up with this situation where these influences came to the lives of the people. And so there was much devastation, chaos, other things. There was also the flip side of that coin where um, the knowledge of the past, the understanding of how to do things in this area dictated how the people moved and the things they did. So in this depiction of the diaspora of people, it describes, what we're considering ourselves as the Nipissing Amikwa groups. And so there's a movement far to the northwest. There's movements to the east to Oka. And so that follows the river system we're concerned ourselves with. You can see it describes itself from the St. Lawrence Seaway into the Ottawa River system, across the Mattawa River, into the French River, onto the north shore of Georgian Bay and Lake Superior. And it also extends into, and through the research, we can describe it extending into southern Ontario and other places of reach. It shows, and the investment of the other original titles that we could describe for you that are also in a similar situation that are encompassed on the Vermont map as well as in this depiction of the diaspora. Those people, for me, they weren't fugitives or refugees of their territory. They were expanded to the outer limits of what they considered territory. There are pieces of history where conflicts arose by the one image there, and you see it in pointing towards the south of James Bay, as it signified by the Mattawatchikarini. And those people ended up in conflicts with Inuit because they started to overstep their territorial bounds. There were other groups far to the west that began to overstep their territorial bounds, the historical knowledge, the ancestral knowledge, and they became in conflict with the Dakota Nation. Extending to the south, we started to encroach in other areas of people's habitation, and we ended up with Haudenosaunee conflicts to the south and the southwest. Uh, and so the nation that we're dealing with is a very substantial, very vast, uh, uh, very old kinship. And so it was fostered by, cultural practices. It was fostered by language similarities. It was kinship ties, marriages, alliances. Uh, and there was a system of governance that was incorporated. And so you start to, in this document here is part of the peacemaking that was ensued by the French at Montreal. And they tried to assemble the factions that were warring and describe for them there's another concern, and that concern was that the onslaught of the English into this region. And so the people were warned to beware of what the English could were capable of. And so you see this imagery here of this Corey's presenting as what you would find as the 1701 peace document at Montreal. And so it contained in it is what the people were expressing as their identities and the best way they could. And so this was through the totemic identity of the traditional governance system that was already uh, existing here and took many, many eons of time to develop. And so it was sought out to be um, uh, throughout the course of time that this has been eroded. This unity of these people, the understanding that they had between them is being lost. And so we've sought to revitalize that understanding, the knowledge here. To most people, it's a bunch of scribbly pictures on a piece of paper, but in reality, what you're viewing is an entire governance system that worked for these people. And so you're looking at a system that was based on totemic identity. And so those totemic identities related to uh, territories within the greater territory. So a word I encountered, I've shared this with Corey and the understanding of what it is, but I encounter a word a couple of times. One is within the structure of the alternative naming of the Amikwabi family. Well, the word is called Achwakone. And for the longest time, the definition of what that was eluded me, but it had my interest. And so Ajwagoni, I discovered later on in the writings through the Temagami Band to the north, they have a sentence that caught my eye, and it was Amik Tiguan Ajwagone. And I'm like, the translation of which means beaver skulls hanging. So we have the knowledge that territorial designation was formed by hanging a skull on a stick on the shoreline of an occupied territory. And these were developed over many, many years through these totemic identities. So, um, Emek Tigwan Ajogoni beaver skulls hanging uh, becomes embedded as part of the understanding of my family's naming. So we can see it here in this document. There's a signature of a Chief Maingan of the Amikwa people encompassed within this image, that they were present and they were willing to describe peace. And so Chief Maingan uh, signs on and says, you know, we're into peace. We like peace as much as anybody else. And so uh, the situation of Maingan, that signature is found on this document, is a continuation of the peacemaking that was ensued here in this early 1600.
Stop talking.
You'll have to excuse me, my grandson is asking me a question. 1 second.
That's young Wyatt there. I think he told him to, I think I heard him say, "Stop talking."
Yeah.
But this is pretty
Sorry,
significant.
sorry for that. So
All right.
we see these, we have these nuances of history. We have these articles that we can rely on to weave together, like as Corey represented, as the trail of breadcrumbs. And so, in doing so, we think we've encountered an entire loaf. And the the breadcrumbs that led us to it, you know, are quite substantial. And so we could bog you down here with many, many articles, many that we've encompassed and we've collected over the years of trying to investigate the situation. And it's formidable and it's substantial and it can be overwhelming. But we've, you know, we've worked very hard to bring it into you know, something uh, that can be tolerated by many people. So it's been a real chore, you know, and through the assistance of Michael Swinwood to help us put it in a perspective, in a context that's you know, that's um, inhalable, you know, that it's been fantastic to have that available to me, because when I started to even overwhelm myself with this understanding. And so being able to organize it and to structure it in such a way we can do these discussions has been a real learning experience. And I enjoy the people that have come to the circle and the way they propose to share or to carry it away, to reshare, has been just just a incredible thing to experience. So, you know, we have much to share. We have much to awaken the minds of people to the realities that exist here. You know, there's such a situation that we've been brought to by the civilized society under the Roman Empire, and truly that's the origin. of some of this deceit that we have to unfortunately describe in order to help give the perspective that's um, fair. And so from that, we have a position. And so the Amikwa people's position is one of, so if you look at the document there, it says, an Algonquian tribe on the island of Manitoulin in Lake Huron and on the north shore of Lake Huron, now extinct. And so the legal opinion, when I was band counsel, the first line of the legal opinion said the French River Band is extinct, which caused me to dig further into the history of this region, which led me along the trail of breadcrumbs to this statement that these people are extinct, which is a little becomes a cautionary note because the word extinct, when you define it, means all dead. Now, when I have a grandfather that tells me our name is Amikwa Abe, and they changed it to Mkwabi, that raised a red flag for me instantly, and it should for anybody else that encounters this knowledge. So we've sought out to define this and prove it succinctly that the there is a serious interruption in knowledge that needs to be exposed. And so we do that. We've worked to do that very much so, and that's why we approach courts because we seem to understand that the best place to place the truth is on a court bench, and that's our first line of action. And it may not be the most uh, substantial or sound action we could take, but it is a place that legitimacy and credibility are formed. And so, you know, it it helps to take us out of the lunatic category because some of the understanding here is so misrepresented and so misunderstood that when presenting this, and if presented improperly, the misunderstanding gets you put in the you don't know what you're talking about category. And it's a very difficult uh, place to be. And so we work very hard to try to do it justice. And that's what this comes down to be is into forming justice in a massive injustice. And so the exposure has uh, a twofold ability, which is one is it uh, causes uh, a repulsion. So anybody that's apparently benefiting from the misinformation, the misunderstanding, when exposed, uh, shrinks away from the responsibility, the duty that should be contained within finding out there are injustices. On the other side of this coin, it inspires and it promotes uh, those that seek justice, that know there is injustice. It helps to give them a platform from which to stand on. So we try to weigh this out as best we can to be fair, to be impartial, to be unbiased, to do what we can with it, and to inspire others to do more. So with that, I'll just let that sit for a minute, and we'll uh,
Chief
describe it in more.
Amakwabi, where does the legal fight stand right now?
The legal fight is as far as engagement with, so we've done a couple of interesting things. One was way back in the day, I was a contractor. I got myself into a situation where I accepted monies under a contract, and then I had Canada Revenue Agency approach me, trying to force me to pay taxes on income that I earned off of the reserve. So I replied to that saying, what reserve? Are you speaking of the fictitious Robinson Treaty thing? Well, then you got a problem. If you're referring to the 1854 Rowan Proclamation that formed these reserves, then you got another discussion. Or if you're describing the large Indian territory that was described in 1763, then we have another discussion. So from that, I was successful in uh, speaking to the Canada Revenue Agency concerning taxation. So that forms through the issuance of, again, 1510 requiramiento of privileges and exemptions that were exacted by behaving oneself. Uh, the next one is the situation with Jackie, my wife and I. We were through the provocations of existing here on this so-called number 13 reserve. We were engaged in a situation. We were charged with trespassing in our own home. Uh, and so we defended that with the help of Michael. I engaged Michael with that, and we were successful of sorts that the absurdity of the charges that were brought were dismissed for delay as a procedural tactic, but it was a success in our eyes. And then from that, we engaged in a couple of other actions. One is the cannabis case. There were 10 kids that were charged under the criminal code here, invoking the Cannabis Act. And so we found fault in knowing this history and the legality surrounding it, that we were promoting to. Excuse me, I got another grandson issue.
There's Jackie making a cameo appearance now.
We got a 4-year-old, guys. So
That's great.
One of the reasons you're fighting this fight. And Corey has 3 girls.
Yeah, well, 3, and then I got another one on the way. We're unsure. This Thursday we're gonna go get an ultrasound. So
Wow.
yeah, I got my hands full. I really do.
And they are, of course, a big reason for you fighting for the recognition of a nation.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I do want to be a good role model for them, and you have to think like history's only getting further away from us, and it's important. It's important to understand where we came from, and I'd like to just draw your attention here to this. It's actually a little excerpt from the 1701 peace treaty here. I'm just going to bring it up. Just one moment. This is the original excerpt in French here, and coinciding with this, you have the 1688 Cornelli map. So, just over 12 years before, Cornelli produced this map depicting. You'll notice the Amikwa and the Nipissarians. So the Amikwa and Nipissings. And interestingly, I transcribed these. And it'd be a great way to close this off, but you can read what it says. And, as we close here today, I'll zoom out just a little bit. Turn your eyes briefly, because this is one of the most important moments in our shared history, and it's the Great Peace of Montreal. So a treaty often spoken of in colonial textbooks, but rarely from the perspective of those who actually shaped it. And this zoomed in crop that I showed you there, and these excerpts, um, the Nipissing, the Algonquin, and Amikwa nations, they were not spectators to this history. They were the architects of it. They were allies, they were diplomats, they were nation builders. Their words recorded at this gathering show a level of governance, protocol, and strategic diplomacy that challenges every lazy stereotype about scattered or fragmented indigenous peoples. And if you listen carefully, the Nipissing said, I did not want to fail to come here like the others to listen to your voice. I had an Iroquois prisoner last year, whom I returned to you as a token of past friendship. Here is a pipe that I present to you, and give to the Iroquois if you wish, so that we may smoke together when we meet. And it's an offering of peace, trust, political intelligence, one based on relationship, not conquest. And then the Algonquin spoke next. I have no prisoners to return to you, my father. The Algonquins are your children who have always been on your side and will remain so as long as they live. I pray to the master of life that what you do today may last. And this is not a submission, but loyalty freely chosen, sealed in sacred words. And then you have the Amikwa, and you'll notice LES versus LA, the singular plural, L'Amiqua, said, having no other will than yours, I obey what you wish to do. And at first glance, it sounds simple, but look closer. Unlike, the plurals of, Le Nipissing and Le Algonquin, the Amikwa are called La Miqua, singular, feminine, one title, one voice. So could this have been a matriarchal title? Perhaps, Mohegan, as depicted on signature 14, a ceremonial spokesperson, but nonetheless, an autonomous entity distinct from both the Algonquin and the Nipissing coalitions. So it suggests possibly something radical, that the Amikwa walked into that historic negotiation not as scattered remnants, but as a distinct nation, recognized even by colonial scribes through the language they accidentally preserved. Far from being lost or erased, the Amikwa were present, speaking, negotiating, protecting their people with grace. And that's not just history, that's legacy. And it reminds us that the Amikwa and nations like them were not passive recipients of colonial rule. They were active, brilliant agents of diplomacy. They were navigating complex alliances, asserting their nationhood. We say sovereignty. It might be a convenient word to use, but their autonomy with every word, every pipe, every gesture. So the real tragedy is not that they lack governance. It's that colonial history chose to forget it. But today, in this gathering, in this story, in this breath, we remember, and we can reclaim that voice. We relight the fire, and we carry that sacred shell forward. So I just wanted to say my miigwech to everyone for being here. Sue, Greg, and some of our other members there. I think I saw Cecil in here, Wendy, and nice comments there. Really appreciate the kind words, everyone. So kitchi miigwech.
Thank you, Corey. What I'd like to do is just for briefly, if you don't mind, open things up for questions. If anyone has anything they would like to add, or for members of your own group or the others who have joined us, if they have a comment. Of course, Chief Amikwa, you can continue, but please watch for the hands up if anyone has questions.
Now, just one more significant piece of information to bring to this piece of conversation is the fact in the modern context that we have encountered a situation that was being fostered through the negotiation of the Algonquin land claim. And so through that work that was done there, a list of non-treaty ancestors was produced. And so the acknowledgement by the Indians of Pikwakanagan, the government of Ontario and the government of Quebec, all acknowledging that this list of ancestors is considerably not found on any treaty, of which the definition of non-treaty is yet to be defined concisely. And that's why something we're working towards. Within the listing, so I'm holding it up here, and it looks like this. It's available. We can make it available, but it encompasses many pages. And within the encompassment are these individuals of history that were found to be not found on any treaties with the government of Canada or the province of Ontario or Quebec. And interestingly, within page 2 is my direct ancestor of Michael Amikwa. When I do the genealogical cross-examination of what I have as a genealogical knowledge of this family and cross-reference it to what's found within contained in this document, a substantial portion of this document are Amikwa family members. Uh, so that raises some red flags to me in the Algonquins land claim. Now, the problem with it is some of the nomenclature that's been utilized here is deceiving. So we have Algonquin coming at us as a French word, and the French word apparently, in our understanding, denotes the usage of birch bark. So the um, situation of the Algonquin people is of one of they use bark for everything, and so it comes at us as la gumme quina, the gum and the bark. And so the utilization of the birch bark was substantially noticeable within the realms of this region because the only way you can traverse here in any good capacity is to have yourself a canoe because to try and walk these lands is next to near impossible to get anywhere in any good time. So the development of the canoe was what substantiated the enforcement of uh, forming a great nation of people unified by their ability to traverse the lands on and expertly in the use of canoes. So though that vessel took many generations to refine and develop into the beautiful craft as we see it today. But that encompassed many lakes, many rivers for people to engage in their Amiktiguan Ajuagone of their hanging of their skulls on their sticks to denote their regions in order to derive sustenance. In the days of, in our modern society here, we're depending upon the grocery store and all the farmers that out there to bring it to us. But back in the day, the reliance on territorial integrity was substantial and it formed substantial law. So it was held in high esteem that the totemic society developed these understandings. And so from that, we can parse out um, characteristics of history that are, relevant to today that we can uh, try to form a balance of how to act. So, it's quite the chore, and nonetheless, it's doable. And so we're working to bring this into the knowledge of the people in the contemporary society as being uh, uh, sympathetic to it, firstly, and then to maybe support it or to, enable us to continue on with what we're doing. There's a severe push that a lot of this information should be swept under a carpet, that should be hidden from sight. And in my journey through the research of the record, I've encountered several instances where that has occurred, and it's blatantly understandable that they buried certain portions of this. The documents, information has been withheld. And from that is where we find our um, some of our standing. is contained within these obscure documentation that, describes more of the situation in a more truthful way that, can benefit our movement here. So it like I said, it's not for the uh, easy reader. It's quite involved, but nonetheless, take confidence in the fact that there are people out here that are working towards this, that are trying to understand these situations, and as we've encountered our journey here, we've met very some very interesting people along the way. And when you sit and you finally engage in a discussion, that the subject matter, you start to realize that the story here and the story there, and when you accumulate them all and put them all in the one place, you see the similarity, and you start to realize we're not so different. And with that, we can start to work together because we can set aside those uh, differences and start to get on to the work of how do we proceed, how do we solve some of these problems, how do we interact with one another that's respectful and productive. So with that, I'd just like to, say thank you for letting me come here and share with you. I know it's been a little bit of broken up today. I've had a bit of a bit of a day already, but nonetheless, here we are. And I'm so honored to sit here with you and engage you and to be able to embrace this technology and to utilize it to its full potential. And I've got another inquisitive grandson here, so I'm gonna have to let you leave it at that. So, miigwech. Aha.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Corey. Do you have any final words you want to share?
Well, we could really chat for days on this stuff, but thank you again, Miigwech, for having us here, Greg and Sue, and all the best to Michael. And thanks for everyone for listening. Hope to come back, and next time I'm hoping to sit and maybe listen myself a little more, which would be nice. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Amikwa. It's been an honor to have you here. It's been inspiring to hear your words and to understand the journey a little bit. I know maybe we should do a 60-hour session to really get ourselves uh, in the swing of things. But the truth is, you've both given us a really excellent synopsis and also connected it to what our mission is, which is about spiritual learning. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks with a little luck, and we'll have the mics open so you can share your own stories, your own journeys, and all the best. Much love.
Wait a minute, Corey,
Yeah,
did you get both Corey and Stacy, did you get that booklet? Susan sent you the link to that little comic book? I
yeah.
was
Oh, yeah. With the Mennonites in Manitoba.
Yes, I forgot about that. I just wanted to ask you about that quickly.
Yeah, I did receive that, and that was very interesting. Those were, I think, some of the first couple of treaties that were actually signed that ultimately brought part of Canada being brought up, or sorry, Manitoba being brought into Confederation. But yes, that's a very thank you for sending that over. I appreciate that, Michelle. That was very kind and it's an interesting
Yeah.
story.
Yes, I actually talked to my dad about it a little bit, and he had told me that the Mennonites actually came from Russia, and they settled in Canada, and then they had kind of like something in common with the Indigenous people because they were also being their culture was being persecuted against in their language. And I mean, it's not any comparison, right? But I mean, they had some kind of understanding to with it. So I think that's what really caused this connection at that time.
Thank you,
Yeah, well,
Michelle.
that's for sure. a very similar. That's why a lot of people came here, is because they were fleeing, you know, persecution, or they wanted to live freely. They wanted to break chains from the tyranny that they may have been experiencing over there. And so those Mennonites who came from Russia and, before that, parts of Central Europe, they did share that experience. Both were targeted by imperial systems, for who they were, for their beliefs, their way of life, their refusal to conform. Both were seen in a way by governments hungry for land, control, and uniformity. Both fled persecution. They're fleeing religious oppression, and indigenous nations resisting cultural annihilation. Both carried sacred relationships with the land, community, and spiritual life, not rooted in conquest or domination. Both were treated by governments, colonial governments, not as partners, but as obstacles to be erased, relocated, or contained. So, when Mennonites were invited to settle here, it wasn't because colonial governments loved their nonviolence. It was because they wanted docile agricultural settlers to replace and outnumber indigenous peoples on the land. And so the Mennonites themselves, however, often maintain a deep distrust, let us say, for the empire. A memory of being persecuted by kings and czars and armies. It's a memory that indigenous people share all too well.
Well, they had set up their own schools here and they wanted to speak Low German and preserve their culture, but the Canadian government actually told them they had to speak English and integrate into Canadian culture. And so a bunch of them actually immigrated to Paraguay. They joined Mennonite colonies there. And the ones that stayed behind, I believe, are the ones that interacted with Dave Scott's tribe there, like what he described in the comic book.
Yeah, exactly. So, even with a sharper focus, when you look at the history, of settlement in Canada, especially Manitoba, something important comes to view. And, the Mennonites fleeing that persecution, they were promised that land, by the Canadian government. And again, it all comes with these privileges and exemptions. So you have to assimilate to a certain degree to receive these privileges. And the government at the time had just signed the numbered treaties. So if you look up Treaty 1 and Treaty 2 in southern Manitoba, which is being referenced in this comic, treaties that were supposed to be about peace, respect, and coexistence. Instead, what happened? Within a few years, land set aside for the indigenous nations under treaty agreements was carved up and given away to settlers, including some of the Mennonite settlers. So, let's be very clear, the Mennonites weren't invaders. They didn't come here looking to conquer. They were like the indigenous, in many ways, refugees from empire. So people who had seen what governments could do to those who lived differently, but they were used, knowingly or not, to fulfill a deeper plan on behalf of the government, and to crowd these indigenous nations off lands to create new farming populations that would tame the prairies for Canada's expansion westward. And it's one of the great uncomfortable truths of our history, that the land the Mennonites were settling was supposed to remain indigenous land under treaty, and yet like so many others, they were offered it freely, while indigenous peoples were left with broken promises and shrinking territories. History is not clean, Michelle, by any means, and sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction.
That's such a good point, Corey, and thank you, Michelle. Really sort of highlights one of the nuances of what was happening to the indigenous people, throughout North America and around the world, really. So thank you all, and we really appreciate today's education on the story of the Amikwa. and the fight goes on. All the best. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.